Hey there everyone, and welcome back to the channel. A few weeks ago I released a video covering Zoids Chaotic Century, a late 90s anime based on a very prolific Japanese line of plastic models. While that video was focused on the first 34 episodes of the Zoids anime, this video will go over the other 33, which has been labeled Zoids Guardian Force in the West. It is important to note that the original airing did not split this show in half or rename it. However, there is a time skip right in the middle, and this show works incredibly well as two separate seasons. So for simplicity's sake, I'll be referring to this as Season 2 of Zoids, and we'll be covering everything after episode 34 of the original show. The first season of Zoids was a show that actually really surprised me. I went in thinking it would mostly be an advertisement for 8 to 13-year-olds, if I could be blunt about it. I hoped that nostalgia might at least keep me entertained for its runtime. What Zoids turned out to be, however, was completely different. Chaotic Century was full of heart, good performances, and a willingness to allow its more adult themes time in the spotlight. It was a show with real development for the main characters, where Vaughn's companions taught him to be a stronger, better person through their own experiences. Also, just a heads up, I did watch the Japanese subbed version of this season, but I will be using the English character names for simplicity's sake. So while Chaotic Century completely blew away my expectations, Zoids Guardian Force now has a lot to live up to. Join me now as we take a look at Studio Zebek's second season of Zoids. Guardian Force picks up 2 years after the defeat of the Godzilla-like Death Soarer at the hands of our main character Von Flyheight and his organoid companion Zeke. Vaughn shows off his evolving skill by wiping out a Republic base's defenses all on his own, and then we get faked out and see that this was just a simulation battle. Vaughn has been training under Republic Colonel Kruger during the last 2 years of peace, but now the Colonel tells him that he needs to take some time off and head back to his home of Wind Colony. No sense in pushing himself too hard when he's one of the best Zoids pilots around, I guess. Of course, this time of peace cannot last too long, as Vaughn meets with a mysterious red-headed man named Hiltz near his hometown, who seems a little bit too ominous for his own good. A Zoid called a Stealth Viper is headed towards Wind Colony and attacks the transport Zoid Gustav, carrying Fiona and Dr. D. Fiona is our secondary protagonist from Season 1 that has gone from young girl with amnesia to a scientific research assistant to Dr. D, who happens to be the foremost scientific mind in both the Republic and Empire. They're attacked by the Stealth Viper, but luckily Zeke is able to tell where Fiona is and lead Vaughn straight to her. When the Viper inevitably attacks Wind Colony with the help of a red organoid, this is where we see that Vaughn's training in the last 2 years has really paid off, as he makes short work of the Viper, organoid or not. Hiltz punishes the pilot of the Viper by throwing him off a cliff to his death, a scene that cements Guardian Force as just as willing to have darker moments as the first season. This is also a scene that was not in the dub version, as a lot of the blatant killings and more violent moments were unfortunately cut out. Vaughn goes to a meeting where Kruger makes him a member of the brand new Guardian Force, a group of Zoid-using peacekeepers whose mission is to hunt down a group of evildoers that are trying to reignite the war between the continent's two powers. Of course, the story eventually veers into dealing with a group of dark figures with organoid companions that cause trouble all throughout the continent, but for the first half of this season we get a lot of episodic stories. That is one thing I would say I enjoy a little bit more about the first season. Vaughn and Fiona are on a search for the Zoid Eve and eventually get embroiled in a war. There's some filler here and there, but the characters always have a concrete goal. Plus, a lot of that season is taken up by the characters traveling from one place to another, and that gives the world a pretty good sense of scale. In comparison, Season 2 has a lot of episodes that are essentially filler, with a few scenes at the very end that include some vital information. That being said, when the story picks up, it really picks up, and the last third of the series is pretty much a straight sprint to the end. Guardian Force also tends to jump around a lot from place to place, so while it is cool to see pretty much every location from season 1 again, it loses that sense of scale that it once had, when characters seem to teleport everywhere. It's kind of like how in the early seasons of Game of Thrones, it would take an entire season for a character to go from somewhere like King's Landing to the Wall, and then in season 8 they just instant transmission all over the place. So Vaughn and Fiona are now members of the Guardian Force and undertake missions all throughout the Republic and the Empire. They're sent in the place of the sick Dr. D to retrieve some ancient Zoidian tablets, and when they arrive at the town they find that the entire town has been beset by an eerie fog, and the townspeople are being mind-controlled by a strange blue-haired woman named Reese, who travels with her organoid specular. Reese uses these small blue bugs combined with something she calls psycho waves to amplify her own thoughts into people's heads. It's a spooky and fun concept, but I do wish that they explained it a little more than that. Zoids isn't absent when it comes to having supernatural powers. Fiona is shown to exhibit a connection with Zeke and a form of telepathy that is chalked up to her being an ancient Zoidian. While the answer to why Reese has this power is obvious, I mean, she's another mysterious girl with hidden memories traveling with an organoid, I do wish it was a bit more than just that. So anyway, Vaughn's first confrontation with Reese comes to a head with Fiona being kidnapped and tied to a post on top of a church. There are a bunch of Republic Gordos that are basically zombies because of Reese's powers, and Vaughn figures out that if he shoots the church bell, the resulting sound will snap everyone out of the mind control. Fiona is tied up right next to the bell, so if Vaughn's aim is even a little bit off, he will miss and possibly kill her. But she trusts him and he makes the shot right on target, forcing Reese to flee. They then discover that the tablets they were sent to retrieve have been destroyed, and the viewer is left to wonder why a group of pilots with organoid partners seem to be targeting ancient ruins. Next, we meet a new character this season that also happens to be part of the Guardian Force. Vaughn is sent to a town in Imperial territory to meet Thomas Schwartz, the younger brother of Colonel Schwartz from the first season. Thomas pilots the massive D-Bison, which he's decked out with a shit ton of guns and missile launchers, and also his partner AI, Beak. Thomas starts out fairly adversarial to Vaughn, as he gets a bad first impression of him and then spends the first half of this season trying to one-up him. That and trying to get with Fiona, who he just immediately falls in love with. Regardless of Thomas's feelings for Vaughn, the two have to team up to fight off a bunch of bandits that have been harassing this town. Teamwork prevails as Vaughn and Thomas are able to take out the 10 command wolves and Gordos, and then Colonel Schwartz shows up and embarrasses Thomas by liking Vaughn more than his own brother. All's well that ends well, I suppose. The misadventures between Vaughn and Thomas continue and actually take up a good chunk of this season. Next, they have to defend a village from some bandits that are using stolen stealth tech in a pretty run-of-the-mill episode, but there is this moment where Zeke has dynamite strapped to him and Fiona dual wields assault rifles, and that was worth the time. This is one of those episodes that feels like filler right up until the end, where we see Hiltz finds this huge pod, like the one that Zeke was in, and a mural of the Death Soarer surrounded by two scorpion-looking monsters. Finally, we get a glimpse of a returning major character as Vaughn tries to take out a group of Zoid hunting pirates named the Zoid Hunters. Irvine returns and appears to be working with the pirates and has a fucking amazing redesign. Of course, Irvine is just there to destroy the pirates from the inside, and he goes back to his old look at the end of the episode. This episode also introduces the giant airship Zoids called Whale Kings, which look amazing, and I kind of ended up wondering why neither the Empire or Republic used them in the first season. They seem really convenient. This is also a convenient time to reintroduce another major character in the form of Raven. Raven and Shadow steal a Gordos and destroy an entire base single-handed, but Raven seems depressed, like his heart isn't in it anymore. Killing people just hits differently after losing to Vaughn. Raven is picked up by an old guy in a Gustav, and he seems to be so scarred that he has become mute. And I suppose he's scarred in more ways than one, because every night he has nightmares so bad that his fingernails cut his palms from clenching his fists so tight, leaving Raven with scarred and bloody palms. Okay, Zoids, that's pretty dark, I'll give that one to you. This is one of those things they cut out of the dubbed version, so Raven just has scarred palms for no reason. Raven doesn't stay this depressed for long though, as by the end of the episode he runs into Vaughn and Irvine while attacking a base, and seeing Vaughn seems to reignite his old self. Hiltz and Reese now believe Raven to be reawakened, and he receives a revived Genosaurer and immediately comes across a lone Thomas, thrashing his D-Bison and leaving him for dead. Man, Thomas really can't catch a break, can he? At first I thought that Thomas might be a one-off character, but he actually sticks around for the entire show and takes up the niche that Irvine filled in the first season. I do think that Thomas's shtick of trying to be in charge of Vaughn goes on for a little bit too long, but it is kind of funny to see how Vaughn just brushes it off almost completely because nobody respects Thomas anyway. Luckily for him, Moonbay, the transporter of the wasteland, rejoins the cast by finding him alone in the desert and taking him to a nearby base. Vaughn takes the threat of a revived Raven seriously and goes through a hard training regimen with Irvine as his sparring partner. He already beat the Genosaurer once and has become stronger since then, but Raven is an unpredictable enemy that Vaughn is determined not to underestimate. Dr. D also returns, having gotten over his sickness, at least I assume so, seeing as how he arrives via parachute. He upgrades the Blade Liger's shield using the same principles that its energy blades use. Since last time Vaughn and Raven fought, Vaughn was able to cut through his particle beams. Moonbay feels like a third, fourth, or a seventh wheel since she's just kind of hanging around, but after talking to Irvine, she ends up staying to pitch in. That's pretty much it for her arc in this season. She starts out feeling kind of like an outsider, but then gets over it and helps out. Unfortunately simple for a fun character like her, and she doesn't really even get much screen time until the end of the show, which is a shame because let me just say I am a fan of her redesign. The next day, Raven approaches the base in his Genosaurer, and while Vaughn and Irvine use good teamwork to keep him on the defensive, Irvine is knocked out and stomped on. Vaughn's shield works against Raven's particle gun, but not when Raven also fires all his other guns at once, overpowering the Blade Liger. Luckily, Moonbay is actually there to block the particle beam with her Gustav's heavy armor, which damages the trusty transporter Zoid. Despite having Vaughn, Moonbay, and Irvine at his mercy, Shadow forces the Genosaurer to flee against Raven's orders. They go to a canyon in the Badlands to hide, and once Raven gets out of his Zoid, Shadow leaps into its core, enveloping the Genosaurer in a red cocoon. This definitely spells trouble for everyone, as the last time we saw Zoid evolve, it came with a massive boost in power. With Raven in hiding, there isn't much for the Guardian Force to do but resume going on missions, which doubles as training anyway, I suppose. They go meet Dr. D at a nearby island village, where legend says an ancient Zoidian city is buried beneath the nearby waves. At first, this seems like an excuse for D to hang out with bikini babes, but soon we learn that every 60 years a lunar eclipse causes the tide stack strangely and expose the ruins. And it just so happens that that eclipse will happen tonight. Reese is there on the island and confronts Fiona when she goes off alone, giving her a vision of Vaughn dying in front of her. This is where Fiona insinuates that Reese is also an ancient Zoidian and implies that Reese is really the one who's suffering. By the end of the episode, after the obligatory Zoid fight in the underwater ruins, we learn that Reese put her own modified memories into Fiona's head to give her that vision. And in Reese's past, a similar scene played out where a boy named Nicholas was killed in front of her. Hiltz flees the ruins in his Whale King, revealing that he took something from them before the tide came back in, and for one final mystery, we see an ancient pillar with a carving that looks just like Fiona sink below the waves. Raven is just chilling outside the cocoon when a bunch of Imperial troops led by Colonel Schwartz shows up and takes him prisoner. He's interrogated at the base but acts like a little shit, like usual. Vaughn and Schwartz decide that the smartest thing to do in this situation is to destroy the Genosaur while it's still in the cocoon. Unfortunately for them, the cocoon is pretty much impenetrable, and when it finally hatches, it reveals the all-new Geno Breaker. Raven is being transported to Gygalos, but literally crashes the Redler he's in into the ground and survives with no issues. That was lucky. He then makes short work of all of Schwartz's troops. Irvine says he has a plan to take it out, but then he immediately gets crushed by the Breaker's claw, and then Raven flees the battlefield because he likes to draw things out, of course. Irvine finally gets a long overdue upgrade, but it comes at the cost of his partner Zoid, the Command Wolf. Irvine is pissed off that Dr. D would even suggest that he transmit his wolf's memory core into the new Zoid, but the Command Wolf's core has been fatally damaged. Irvine has been closer to his Zoid than anyone else on the show, but now he has the opportunity to gain an incredible upgrade with the prototype Lightning Sykes. This cat-like mech is a Dr. D original, based on the design of an ancient Zoid. When Hiltz comes up with a plan to kill the President of the Republic by putting her in an out-of-control D-Bison that is about to run off a cliff, Irvine has to come to terms with becoming the Sykes' pilot to speed out there and save President Louise. Now we finally get Raven's backstory explained to us. While Raven and the other two organoid users have similar goals in mind, Raven is just about the last person who's willing to work on a team. Reese knocks him out with her bug/mind powers, and he has a flashback to when he was a child. His parents are scientists working on uncovering an organoid. Unfortunately, this organoid turns out to be Shadow, who is really bad-tempered compared to Zeke, so when he gets out of his pod, he kills Raven's parents in front of him and then flees into the wilderness. Jesus Christ, Zoids. Raven is then found by Vaughn's father, Dan Flyheight, and also the priest from Wind Colony. Remember him? It's cool that they brought him back, since he mentioned being an army doctor, and here he is in Dan's unit. I really enjoy that attention to detail. Dan plans on taking Raven back to Wind Colony with him after his current mission to recover another organoid, but Preutzen shows up and Dan ends up self-destructing to take out a bunch of Imperial troops. Raven is found by Preutzen and taken back to his lab, where 5 years later his men are finally able to track down Shadow, who he gives to Raven, saying that if the boy can tame the wild organoid that killed his parents, it's his to command. Finally, Raven wakes up in a strange cave, face to face with the true evil behind Hiltz's motives, a man known as the Dark Kaiser, who tells him that there's no escaping his past. It's nice to finally see Raven's history, and it does explain why he's such a sociopath and why he hates Zoids so much. I also do like the dynamic between Raven, Reese, and Hiltz. They aren't a team or even really a cohesive unit, and their bickering adds another layer onto the antagonists this season. Vaughn and the others have been coming up with a plan to take down the Geno Breaker under a guy named Colonel Halford. Vaughn's training has allowed him to push the Liger to be even faster than the Lightning Sykes, plus Dr. D has invented a device that allows their Zoids to generate a particle-disabling field. It all sounds pretty good until Halford comes in and tells them not to use the device and for Vaughn to lower his Liger's speed because his simulations tell him that this is the better plan. Our trio of protagonists is too smart to leave their fate up to Halford's decision-making, and through the original plan they lock down the Geno Breaker, and a bunch of stealth Goljulises open fire on it, only to reveal that the Geno Breaker is equipped with an incredibly powerful shield. Vaughn ends up fleeing the battlefield when the plan goes wrong, not wanting Raven to kill the worn-out Irvine and Thomas. He then tries to use the move that he used on the Death Soarer, but the Breaker's beam is too powerful and Vaughn is blown off a cliff and into a ravine. Vaughn is ejected from the Liger and falls into a nearby river. Despite Zeke and Fiona trying to save him, he wakes up downstream with a stomach wound, making it to a nearby village. However, everyone seems afraid of him and runs away, leaving Vaughn to bleed out in the middle of the road. The only one who will help him is a young boy named Nicholas, who takes Vaughn to his nearby hideout in a cave and nurses him to health. Nicholas lives in the nearby village, but he says that he comes here to spend time with his Zoid friend T-Roll, because the townspeople hate Zoids. Soon after, Vaughn has to use a red raptor to defend the town from a rogue Imperial soldier named Captain Seafers, who is from Season 1. The villagers come around once Vaughn defends them and take his side, and we learn the truth as to why they don't like Zoids. Years ago, Imperial soldiers came to the town looking for a girl, threatening to burn the entire place down if the villagers didn't give her up. The only person to defend the girl was Nicholas, the young boy who originally brought her to the village, and he was shot and killed for the trouble. Reese appears and tries to take Vaughn and the others out once and for all with her particle beam, but is stopped by the spirit of Nicholas. Reese was found by Nicholas just like Vaughn found Fiona, but Nicholas paid for that with his life. Revealing Reese's past like this was a pretty cool revelation. Plus, Vaughn befriends a ghost and bonds over his love of Zoids in this episode, and I just think that's neat. Reese's backstory is actually really moving, and I know that I've said it many times already, but Zoids is just not afraid to tell a mature story in a show aimed at a younger crowd. The Geno Breaker has still not shown itself after defeating Vaughn in the last battle, which has led our heroes to regroup at a base to repair their machines and come up with a plan. Zeke starts to act all weird, and Fiona tries to get Vaughn to pay attention to him, but with his worries about Raven reappearing, he brushes her off. They slap some boosters onto the Liger, but during testing they overheat and explode, taking out the entire testing facility, which I did not expect. Eventually they slap on a third generation set of boosters, and it's revealed that Zeke wasn't sick, but was awakening a new power, jumping into the Liger and allowing it to speed up even faster. So fast that Fiona thinks that the sheer speed will kill Vaughn. It turns out she should have believed in Vaughn from the beginning, because his drive to better his abilities has resulted in him being able to truly bring out the Liger's potential. He immediately demonstrates this when Hilt shows up with a Zoid called a Gun Sniper, which has been empowered by his organoid ambient, and Vaughn takes it down with no trouble at all, causing them to flee. Zoids then gives us a filler episode where a guy tries to assassinate Emperor Rudolph while he drives a cool race car, which is a pretty fun setup, and it's good to see Rudolph again. He doesn't really get to do much this season. Season 2 seriously underutilized him, in my opinion, and the few times we do get to see Rudolph, someone is trying to kill him, which, you know, that's actually pretty par for the course for the first season as well. We get a really good Irvine-centric episode where he's investigating some mercenaries that somehow got their hands on prototype Imperial stealth tech. He ends up getting knocked out, his Zoid stolen and framed as a bandit, having to ally with a Republic intelligence officer named Carol to get the Sykes back. This episode is actually really good. It involves action, romance, survival, double, no, triple crossing betrayals. Honestly, my only criticism of this solo Irvine adventure is that it should have been a two-parter, cause there's too much good shit here to cram into 20 minutes. Especially when the episode prior to this was a clip show recap episode. Just look at the ending moments here and tell me this storyline didn't deserve more time to develop.
行こうか、アンビエント。
Finally, Raven gets tired of waiting around and decides it's time to end Vaughn once and for all. So he takes his Geno Breaker and heads for the base where the Guardian Force are tuning up their Zoids. Of course, Vaughn hasn't just been sitting around. When Raven shows up to destroy the base, he takes him head on, with fire support from the base's gun snipers. Meanwhile, Fiona was studying some huge Zoid core readings from a nearby valley. Hilt unveils his stealthed Whale King and explains his super evil plan. Basically, long ago, ancient Zoidians couldn't keep the Death Soarer under control, so they came up with two scorpion-like Guardian Zoids to keep it in check. Hiltz has located and stolen those ancient Zoids cores. That's what he was doing at the underwater ruins. Hiltz has experimented on and combined these cores to create the most evil Zoid ever, the Death Stinger. Vaughn has Raven on the ropes, and it finally seems like Raven is getting his ass handed to him and having his whole having friends makes you weak shtick shattered. But before Vaughn can land a finishing blow, Hiltz fires the Death Stinger's huge particle beam that reaches all the way to the base and destroys it. Hiltz then takes off with the powerful Zoid in tow, leaving behind Raven and his wounded Genobreaker, as it seems Raven's part of the plan has come to an end. The Genobreaker was so heavily damaged that Shadow has become petrified, leaving Raven to face his betrayal alone. Hiltz begins his final plan, which is to go straight to the Republic capital and destroy it with the Death Stinger's particle beam. At first, he tries to do this by mounting the Zoid on his Whale King and using it like a battleship cannon, which is really cool, but ultimately doesn't work when the ship is shot down. This involves them getting on storm sorters and flying up into space to shoot the Whale King down, and I didn't think there'd be a space battle in Zoids, but here it is. This doesn't really make Hiltz mad though, as he relishes the opportunity to destroy everything in his path on the way to New Helix City. The entire army of the Republic deploys to slow the Death Stinger down so that people can evacuate, but they're no match for the ultimate Zoid. Even Thomas and Irvine are heavily damaged without being able to even scratch the Death Stinger. Even characters like Rob Herman and Colonel Schwartz get in on the action in the final arc of the show, which made it the most enjoyable stretch of the entire anime for me. If I have one big criticism of Guardian Force, it's that I would have preferred more stories dealing with the already established characters over the episodic content that takes up the first half. Sure, the early arcs aren't exactly filler, and they usually push the story forward in some way or feature Hiltz or one of the other antagonists, but Vaughn's group never really has a real goal like they did in Season 1. Sure, they're part of the Guardian Force, and they're supposed to keep peace throughout both countries, but that isn't a very concrete goal. Even when Raven shows up and starts causing trouble, the main group mostly just waits around for him to show up. They seem to react to the actions of the antagonists rather than taking proactive action, and overall that does make Guardian Force feel a bit slower paced, at least until the Death Stinger shows up, because now it is a sprint until the end. About 60% of the Republic's military is destroyed while holding off the Death Stinger, buying time for the citizens of the capital to evacuate. President Louise plans to have everyone regroup at a place called Wendine Lake, which she says holds the Republic's last hope against Hiltz. The Death Stinger makes it to the outskirts of New Helix City, and when Raven and Reese show up to confront him for catching them in the particle beam earlier, he simply says their part in the plan is over and blasts them both, destroying the city as well. Colonel Kruger, back from the first episode, comes out of retirement to take command of the Republic's forces at Wendine Lake. The lake itself is drained upon the arrival of the Republic army, revealing a gigantic half-buried fortress Zoid called the Ultrasaurus. The Ultrasaurus has an amazing design, and we see that its core is absolutely huge. When it finally comes online and unearths itself, we really get a sense of scale for this thing. They just narrowly escape the Death Stinger's particle beam attack and flee into the ocean, with their destination being a secret lab somewhere in Imperial territory. Oh yeah, also during the attack, the Death Stinger is blowing holes through mountains in order to shoot at the Ultrasaurus because it's faster than walking, which is pretty damn cool. Also, Colonel Kruger falls down and bumps his head, so Rob is field promoted to Colonel and takes command, finally coming out of his mother's shadow, which is hard to do when your mom is the president and also a baddie, might I add. The fortress makes its way across the sea, and our heroes are told by President Louise that they're heading to a secret lab where Dr. D has built a weapon called the Gravity Cannon that they're going to strap on to the Ultrasaurus. While this is pretty awesome, having Louise say, "This giant gun is our last chance at peace," is more than a little funny when you stop to think about it. Yeah, lady, like, no one's ever going to use the 3-mile long cannon that literally fires black holes for anything bad. Dr. D explains to Rudolph that he can only make 3 shells for the gravity cannon because of the rarity of the materials, so that gives us some high stakes for taking out the Death Stinger. As it turns out, the Scorpion Zoid can also swim and chases the Ultrasaurus into the sea, only to be shaken off their trail when Rob uses this gas called methane hydrate on the seafloor to blow him away. It was definitely an interesting plan and episode, that's for sure. At the end, there's a shot of the Ultrasaurus coming out of the water, and honestly, the way they integrated the 2D water effects with the 3D Ultrasaurus model for some of these shots is very impressive. What else is impressive is the gravity cannon itself, which is so big that Herman thought it was part of the base's structure at first. Dr. D says they need to use one of the shells for a test fire shot, leaving the Ultrasaurus with 2 shots in combat. They test fire the cannon, which lobs the shell up into space and back down, which causes a massive implosive vortex upon impact that shatters the ocean floor, so yeah, pretty powerful. While this has all been going on, Raven has taken Shadow's body back to the village where he was raised. Reese shows up there not too long after he does, and we see that he has warmed up to her at least a little bit because instead of leaving her to die from a fever, he takes care of her. Shadow glows and suddenly disappears, and Reese says that he's probably gone to Zoid Eve, and that they should go there as well. Finally, we hear more about the original MacGuffin of Zoids. It's been so long. After Vaughn and co test fire the gravity cannon, the Death Stinger just sorta doesn't show up, which is weird because Hiltz has been right on their tail for quite some time. So when he starts attacking locations throughout the Empire like Sand Colony and Mount Isolina Village, Vaughn realizes it's a message. Hiltz is retracing Vaughn's path to Gygalos in Season 1 and destroying everything, erasing all the good that they did. Vaughn is able to figure out that the next place that the Death Stinger will show up is the Garil Plateau, so they head directly there to cut him off. Vaughn, Irvine, and Thomas come up with a plan to hold Hiltz still by circling him and trapping him with their shields. At first, this doesn't work, as when Hiltz sees the incoming gravity shell, he's able to break free and shoot it down with his particle beam. But then he does the dumb villain thing of leaving the heroes alive so they can witness him being very evil. This makes Vaughn, Irvine, and Thomas even more determined, and they trap him once again in a shield set to full output, and this time there's no breaking out. Well, I mean, he does break out, but it's too late and the shell hits him directly, with Vaughn and co getting out of the blast just in time. They watch as the Death Stinger is crushed at the center of the implosion. Eventually, the gravity field fades and the Zoid begins to turn to stone. Just as we think the Death Stinger's core is about to go offline for good, Ambient jumps into it and begins to heal the ancient Zoid, just like Zeke did for the Liger way back in Season 1. Hiltz has the Death Stinger burrow underground to escape so it can regenerate, with only Vaughn and Irvine in good enough condition to give chase. Even while wounded, the Death Stinger puts up a pretty good fight against them, and it almost seems like Hiltz might triumph over Vaughn until Thomas shows up, being towed by Moonbay and the Gustav, and shoots it with a bunch of lasers. The teamwork of the 3 main Zoids pilots wears down the Death Stinger, but Hiltz says that it doesn't even matter if they kill him because the Zoid Eve will destroy all of humanity anyway. Then the Death Stinger disappears in a flash of light, just like Shadow did earlier, but this time Fiona also disappears as well. Turns out that the Zoid Eve, whatever it is located in the Dark Kaiser's super secret crystal cave, and that happens to be located in the Valley of the Rare Hertz. Back in Season 1, there was an episode where Vaughn and friends had to cross a valley while traveling, and the frequency emitted by something at the center of this valley causes Zoids to go completely berserk. It was pretty much a one-off back in Season 1 where Vaughn had to prove how deep his bond with Zeke was, but it is pretty cool that they brought that back because the mystery of what was at the center of the valley was a mystery that was never solved. Raven wakes up and sees that Shadow is alive and well. He tells Shadow to just kill him, and Shadow's like, "Stop being weird, you weirdo." Finally, we get a good look at the Dark Kaiser himself, who, surprise, surprise, is just Proidson, but he's been melted into the Death Sorer's core. Proidson Sorer tells Fiona that he's abandoned his human body to become the most powerful being on the planet, but I mean, look at him. Is it really an even trade? Proidson spills the beans that the rare hertz that causes Zoids to bug out is actually a gateway to an ancient Zoidian city called Evopolis. He then mind controls Fiona and makes her open the gate as only an ancient Zoidian can. Inside the city is an immense statue bathed in a glowing light, and the entire landmass begins to raise itself out of the ground and into the sky. The rare hertz causes sleeper Zoids all around the area to go berserk and attack, slowing Vaughn's race to save Fiona. Zeke and Fiona have had a special connection ever since they were found together, so when Zeke seems to know where she is, Vaughn is quick to follow his lead. Fiona is given a wave of ancient knowledge and memories, finally realizing what the Zoid Eve actually is. Long ago, the ancient Zoidians created a technology that could build Zoid cores, and they used Zoids all across the planet to create a golden age of prosperity for their people. However, once Zoids were used for combat, the animal mecha awakened to their inner warrior spirit, and the fighting raged across the globe. With no way to stop endless war, ancient Zoidian scientists modified a core and created the Death Sorer as an ultimate Zoid to end the fighting. We also find out that the Death Sorer that Vaughn destroyed at the end of Season 1 was basically just a clone, and the true original Death Sorer is here in Evopolis in pieces. Currently, the Zoid Eve is in a sort of standby mode, which is the reason that wild Zoids are becoming more and more rare throughout the series. If the Zoid Eve is powered on fully, it will once again allow Zoids to freely multiply across the planet. This sounds good and cool at first, but it would have the side effect of resurrecting the ancient Death Sorer's body and unleashing it once again. The other option that Fiona is faced with is to destroy the Zoid Eve, which would permanently seal the Death Sorer away, but would also cut power to all these Zoid cores across the world, as the Eve is essentially their life source, so say bye-bye to the Liger and Zeke if she decides to do that. Meanwhile, Vaughn finally engages with Hiltz and the Death Stinger outside the floating city. He tells Zeke to go find Fiona, confident that he can take on Hiltz alone at this point. They fight, and Vaughn scares Hiltz so badly that he has to have his organoid jump in and heal him mid-battle. While Vaughn keeps Hiltz busy, Dr. D is creating another shell for the gravity cannon, and the Ultrasaurus approaches Evopolis. Reese and Raven decide that they need to fight as well and try to stop Proidson from obtaining his perfect body, but he can control a bunch of Genosaurs to attack them. Fiona still struggles over the biggest decision in the world when a stray shot flies up and hits the platform where she and Zeke are standing, unleashing the power of Zoid Eve. With the power unleashed, Hiltz gets absorbed into the Death Stinger's core. The Death Sorer is being reborn, with Hiltz arriving to become part of its giant body. While Proidson is going on about taking over the world, he doesn't realize that Hiltz has planned to betray him from the very beginning, and when he is fully absorbed into the core, he takes control of the ultimate Zoid. He says Proidson was only a pawn to be used to protect the Death Sorer's core, and only an ancient Zoidian like him can truly control it. A bunch of faces appear on the Death Sorer's core, which is really weird and creepy looking, and I kinda love it. Finally, the Ultrasaurus fires its gravity cannon shot directly at the Death Sorer, and it does nothing. Well, that's disappointing. Vaughn and Raven finally have to put aside their differences and work together to fight the Death Sorer, but everything they do seems to be in vain. The true Death Sorer is many magnitudes more powerful than its clone from Season 1, and they barely scraped by in that fight. Fiona decides the only way to defeat the ancient evil is to combine with Zeke and shut down the Zoid Eve, but when she begins to do that, Vaughn asks her to stop, saying that he'll defeat Hiltz himself. He asks Fiona to believe in him one more time, as it is Fiona's belief in him that has given him strength all throughout the series. Vaughn comes up with a plan where they fire the Blade Liger out of the gravity cannon at the Death Sorer. Raven fires his Genobreaker's particle beam for so long that he passes out and falls off a building, but it knocks out the Death Sorer's shield. Vaughn flies into the monster, taking a particle beam shot in the process but shaking it off. He slices the core completely, killing Hiltz in a single blow, and flies out the other side in a final attack that's, well, it's pretty fucking hype. It's pretty much what they did at the end of Season 1, but times 100. Evopolis sinks back below the surface, with Zoid Eve's power being fully unleashed. We're left to wonder if this will usher in a new age of prosperity, or if the embers of war will continue to reignite. Vaughn, Fiona, and Zeke reunite with all the characters that they've befriended over the course of 2 seasons, and the credits roll, putting an end to the original series of Zoids. Yeah, that was a pretty abrupt ending. I usually really like when a show reserves the last 10 minutes or so to have a few character moments that we can leave with, but Zoids was all business. Fortunately, Guardian Force is far from the last Zoids anime that would air, and while this is the only Zoids show that I remember, well, I'm definitely not opposed to covering more in the future. So, while I started out under the very wrong impression that Zoids was just a cartoon aimed at children to sell toys, I was quickly proven wrong. Both seasons of Zoids far exceeded my expectations, though I will say that I think Season 2 has a less interesting story, mostly because a lot of the main characters' agency doesn't really amount to much. But even with a less interesting adventure, Vaughn, Fiona, and Zeke are now a favorite trio of mine when it comes to anime protagonists. Not to mention the fact that this show's from the turn of the century and the CG actually doesn't look bad a lot of the time. Season 2 has a lot more fluid action than the first did, and that makes the episodic content more exciting moment to moment. At the end of the day, I think I could recommend Zoids to pretty much anyone with an interest in late 90s mecha anime. It does what anime of that era did very well, tells a story that is from the heart, putting real effort into a nuanced tale of ideals, friendship, and growing up. So what did you think of both seasons of Zoids? Is it an old favorite of yours? Did you just recently discover it, like myself? Let me know down below, and as always, I will see you again very soon. Hello everybody and welcome to today's end card. Let's start off right by thanking our channel members as always, aka Batosai Azure Windress, Brian Sanchez, Daniel Johnson, Dilla Soul 22, Gert, Harmonious, Hidden Insanity, Joe Castellanos, Joe Cavazos, Johnny G, John Lamb, Canto 20, McLean Nugent, Sindustries, Trey Hardy, Video Gamers 75, Yo-Yo Mitch, and Zappa Slave. I did not try to do it in one breath that time. I'm tired. I don't have it in me today. It's been hot. It's been sticky. I've been watching a lot of stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Zoids has been quite a fun watch for me. I've been telling everyone that will listen that Zoids is actually really cool and you should watch it because it's more than just look giant animal robot, be cool. It's actually just a fun story with really impressive animation for the time. So yeah, really glad that it was something that a lot of people wanted me to do. Because that first Zoids video did pretty well, so I'm hoping this one does as well. A lot of the times, a Season 2 video or like a second video in a series, viewership drops off a little bit, so we'll see. That first one's almost at like 40k, which is really nice for a non-Gundam video. Speaking of Gundam, next up we're going back to the Gundam retrospective. It is going to be Gundam Build Fighters Try. That video should be fairly easy to produce and everything. I'm already done watching the show and I'm writing the script right now. Pretty good. Not as good as the first season, unfortunately. Won't ruin anything else. Then after Gundam Build Fighters Try, of course, we have coming up the community pick of Outlaw Star. And then after Outlaw Star, everyone's been waiting for it. I've decided that the next thing in the Gundam retrospective after that is going to be Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans, which is probably the most requested thing on this channel ever, despite the fact that the Gundam retrospective is by release order, but so many things for Gundam released in 2015 that like I just picked whatever I wanted, and I really like Iron-Blooded Orphans a lot. Spoiler, I'm very biased towards it, so I just wanted to do that. So that video is already being worked on. I am watching through season 1 right now. It will be 2 videos. Season 1 and season 2 I think deserve their own video, so be on the lookout for that. Other than that, this is a 3-minute end card almost, so it's been dragging on for forever. So again, thank you for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Oh, go over to the gaming channel right now and subscribe or else. Basically. Over there right now we have, I'm doing Final Fantasy X. I'm almost done with Pokemon Emerald. We're like right at the Elite Four. And I have some other stuff coming up that's really exciting. So yeah, if you like Let's Plays like an old fart like me, that's over there. We're doing classic stuff. So anyway, thank you. I'm done babbling. You all have a great day. Bye-bye.